Okay. Okay, ready? Okay, so we are on page 197. I'm just going to share screen. Those watching at home. Am I right? 197? That's where we're at? Okay. We were discussing Tefillah B'Tzibur last time. Just close that door. Oh, thank you. Thank you. Okay. Let me just share screen. Okay, here we go. So we're on page 197, and we were discussing whether well, the various obligations of Tefillah B'Tzibur. And within that sort of category, we were discussing when one is and is not required. And now we've got a little bit left to discuss in terms of the question of women's obligation to participate in a minyan. So if women are obligated in tefillah at least once a day, possibly twice a day, they're not obligated to daven with a minyan. So no one seems to say women are actually obligated. They bring here, for example, a more modern svara in Halichot Bat Yisrael, Rav Fuchs in source 11 here on page 197. Page 197, source 11. Rav Fuchs writes in the Halichot Bat Yisrael that even if a woman is not obligated to, it's a good thing for her to daven in a minyan. Source 11. Af she'ein isha mitztarefet leminyan asara ve'ein hi mitzuva litpalel b'tzibur. Even though she doesn't count for a minyan, and obviously she's not commanded to daven with a minyan. Maila gadola letfilatav beit hakneset v'zchut gadola b'kach. She has a great merit in doing so. Right, we know the Gemara which talk about the idea that tefillah of the rabbim is not rejected. Right, these are the Gemaras in the beginning of brachot, and therefore, even though she's not obligated to daven in a minyan, it's obviously a great zchut and a ma'ala for her tefillah to have it done b'tzibur. Right, they bring here the Pelayoetz here in source 12, who also writes it's a good thing for women to go to shul if they can. So source 12. Right, and it's best that women can go to shul if they're able to. And you sort of see the evolution in these things. Like you go back to Krakow. Have you ever been to Krakow? You go to the Ramaz shul, Ramosha Isserlis's shul. There's no Ezrat Nashim because that's there just wasn't one in the 16th century. You know how many women went to shul? But I don't know. They put up a little thing at the back. If at all, they had to like knock down a wall to make an Ezrat Nashim in the Ramaz shul. Sorry, I see. It's Katanga had no stairway. I see. More accessible. But like you see this all the time. I've been in Alon Shvut, obviously where I spent a decade basically living. So you look at sort of the evolution of women coming to shul more often. You can see the difference between the shul in the old neighborhood and the shul in the new neighborhood. Whereas the shul in the old neighborhood, only the main sanctuary, the main hall, has an Ezrat Nashim. The side rooms where they daven only during the week, there's nothing. But in the new shul, Rav Ramon's shul, so even the side rooms have a mechitza. because more women are going. The younger community are opting to go to shul in the week more than perhaps their parents did, and it's becoming, I think, more.
Could that be?
Sorry,
Instead of having a continuous run of
I hear it.
children, so that they could never get out.
Yes, but what about everyone who's, done with children? So, but
They're
it's
exhausted.
sorry, I see. They've got the grandkids so that the kids can go to shul. Right. Okay. What about if you've got, so if a woman's not strictly speaking obligated to daven in minyan, but it's a good thing, the question is what happens when she's got a clash between davening with a minyan and another mitzvah. So they quote here, his name is Yisrael Pesach Feinhand. That was it, right? The Avnei Yoshpa. The Avnei Yoshpa says in source 13 that she's not obligated in it. If she has another mitzvah to do, she shouldn't stop the other mitzvah because of it shouldn't come at the expense of davening with the minyan. She's not strictly speaking obligated to daven with the minyan, even if she can. So he quotes here in source 13, "B'halichot bat Yisrael katav v'zeh l'shono ma'ila gadol tefilata b'beit knesset u'zchut gdola b'kaf." Right. So he quotes that there's this great zchut for a woman to daven with a minyan. V'yesh la'ayenim avor ma'ila hazot shel tzibur mutar le'isha lehafsid mitzvot acharot. But we have to see if just the important mitzvah of davening with a minyan, does that mean she should forego other mitzvot? ובאמת, קשה להבין שאישה שמתפללת בעזרת נשים נחשבת כתפילה בציבור. So firstly, he objects, at least certainly in Beit Yehuda, whether maybe the Ezrat Nashim is tefillah b'tzibur, because it's in a separate level. Shaharei eina ba'oto cheder k'mo hatzibur, not in the same room. V'kama v'kamot gam eina ro'a otam, right? And some places you can't even see them, right? You go to Satmar or whatever, the bulletproof, bechitza between the men and the women. It's and mamash, like it's some more Hasidic places, it's literally a separate room. And therefore he says, "Lachen nireli shemash ma tov im isha yachol להתפלל בציבור, אבל לא על חשבון שום מצווה אחרת." Either way, he has discussions there, and he says that it shouldn't trump another mitzvah. So one of the classic, difficult question is Friday night, early Shabbos. So early Shabbos, you've got a problem, because if the woman wants to go to shul, she can't also light candles, because you have to light after Plag HaMincha. But once you've davened Mariv or brought in Shabbos, you can't then go home and light. So it really presents a challenge. Early Shabbos presents a challenge, but I have to say I give hats off to my wife Shira. Before we had kids, even when we had our first, when she would daven mincha at home. This is when we're living at Alon Shvut. My wife would daven mincha at home. She would light right after Plag HaMincha, and then would run to shul to get for Kabbalat Shabbat. So to cut the end of Kabbalat Shabbat. But the problem, it's too early. We don't usually allow lighting before Plag Mincha, even if we're gonna, we don't put it on a delay, so to speak. There's no heker. There's no heker. There's no recognition that the candles are for the purpose of Shabbos. So we wouldn't allow lighting on, let's say, before Plag HaMincha and making the bracha afterwards, because the candles have got to be lit after Plag HaMincha. However, I will use this opportunity without getting in trouble. Hopefully, see who's on the Zoom, without getting in trouble, to say that the earliest time a woman can bring in Shabbos, a woman who wants to go to shul, is not the time which Mizrahi prints on the 5-minute window, but rather Plag HaMincha is the earliest time, strictly speaking. So usually you add a minute just in case it's slightly before. You want to make sure you've got it. So if you add a minute after the Plag HaMincha time, that's the mamash the earliest a woman can light. Right, it's you miss most of Kabbalat Shabbat, but you get there for Ma'ariv, right? It's one of the issues about time is that early Shabbos plus candle. It's also difficult because let's say you have a man living on his own, a student or a young guy is left home and he's lighting for himself. He's chayav in mincha, so he has to find an early mincha or daven mincha, drive light, and then but have in mind that he's not bringing in Shabbos and drive back. There is a case like that. I know something the community asked me what to do. Instead of finding an early, if he wants to do early mincha, but he also wants to light when he eats at home. It's difficult. Okay, Rosh Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, however, seems to say that there is no Indian of Tefillah B'Tziburit for a woman at all. In this sort of throwaway comment here that they've brought in source 14 from the Halichot Shlomo, he says that a woman should not skip. You know how if we're late for shul, we skip over parts of Sukkot Zimra to make sure we get with a minyan. He says a woman shouldn't do this because she doesn't have a din of Tefillah B'Tzibur. So in source 14, Ve'isha lo tedaleg b'seder Tefillah k'dei lahaspik lehitpalel im hatzibra. A woman should not skip part of davening to daven with the minyan. Ki en la din Tefillah B'Tzibur klal. She hasn't got a status of davening with the minyan. So Rosh Shlomo Zalman had a very sort of strong, radical perhaps take on it. It's not like she shouldn't skip Pazukei Zimra or bit to get to Amida at the same time as the Tzibra because she's not obligated in Tefillah B'Tzibra, and it does seems like there's not even a miler in that regard. However, the Yalkut Yosef says even if there is no reason for a woman to join a minyan per se, nonetheless she does get the important schar of what happens when you're in shul. You can ask the Kaddish, you can ask the Kedusha, Baruch Hu. These are all Dvarim Shebikdusha, and therefore there is importance for women to come to shul, even if you were to say like Rosh Shlomo Zalman. So he says in source 15, since women are obligated in davening, he is interested in having a special section for the women in shuls. However, women are not obligated in davening the minyan, because they don't join a minyan. Nonetheless, they do have reward al mashe or not amen achar shlich tzibur by answering to the chazan amen or achar ha'omer kaddish or after kaddish v'hashomot kriyat Torah, and also in listening to laning as well. So even if a woman is not strictly speaking obligated in davening with a minyan, she has schar from the various mitzvot which could only take place in a minyan. I will add to this, there's still a foot of a tefillah which is with a tzibur is obviously the ultimate tefillah. Right, we saw already, I said the Gemara is at the beginning of Brachot, which talk about the ma'alot, the great level of davening the community, that the tefillah are not rejected in the same, as quickly as tefillah of the Yachid. So that's a little just take in terms of women's obligation in tefillah b'tzibur. You're going to ask something? You look like you're, no?
I'm just thinking it sounds like typically not part of the communal, even if they're there from part of what you said, completely different. So it just sounds like it would be contradicting.
Right. I just got asked in the chat. So what if a man has to light candles and conflicts with davening with the minyan? Should they prioritize minyan? There's an obligation to light candles. It's a really difficult one. The best would be to try and find an earlier minyan or something, if you can, for mincha. Or don't do early Shabbos. Well, you can't do later candles because once you've said lechadodim is Shabbat, you've brought in Shabbat, so you can't light candles. It's somebody who's at home that Shabbat, it does make life difficult. Okay, so let's look at the next section here on page 199. Okay, so we're dealing with in Tefillah B'Tzibur. Who is included in the tzibur? How many do you need in terms of the tzibur? Now, previously we discussed, if you remember, Chazarat Hashatz. We discussed that the machlokes about whether for answering Amen, but also for Chazarat Hashatz if you need 6 or 10. There's machlokes in this regard about Chazarat Hashatz. But what is the identity of the people? Do they have to be davening now? So the Chaya Adam says that you've got to be 10 people who have not yet davened who are davening now. So according to this Chai Adam, would be an issue. Let's say you have 9 and you want to pull someone in who's already davened to be number 10. The Chai Adam, he's already davened, he's just to answer Amen. You cannot do that according to the Chai Adam. He says it's a Ta'ut Gadol, he says. Ironically, there's a Ta'ut Gadol in the phrase Ta'ut Gadol because it should be Ta'ut Gadolah. I always find that quite ironic when they're right. It's a Ta'ut Gadol, it's a Ta'ut Gadolah. But if we look here in the Chai Adam, source 16, he says, the most important part of davening with the minyan is the Amida. The high new this is 10 adults need to daven together. In other words, all 10 have to be davening their Amida now. Not like the multitudes and the masses who say that the main thing is just to daven with 10. Who rak mishum lishma kaddish u'kedusha baruch hu. Some people mistakenly believe the whole idea of a minyan is so that you can have kaddish and kedusha baruch hu recited. V'lachen einam makpidim litpalel biyachad rak sheyeh yud b'beit hakneset. Therefore, they don't care about all davening together. They just care that there are 10 people answering amen in shul. V'hu ta'ut gadol. That's a great mistake. So the Chai Adam is against this idea of just having people come and fill the minyan. Let's set the 7 o'clock minyan if you're bringing in people from 6:30 minyan to try and be number 10 or 7:20. To try and be to be number 10. Right. So he's not a fan of this. The Chai Adam says you've got to have 10 people davening now, but also you've got to have 10 people starting the Amidah at the same time. The minyan is 10 people davening together.
Would he then, under that basis, not be the 10th person to it then and deny the others the opportunity of saying Kaddish or Baruch?
Yes, because it's a ta'ut gadol or gdolah in his opinion.
So it's better that they miss out on saying Kaddish or saying because
he thinks that you can't. Well, maybe Kaddish you could say, but you couldn't say certain tefillot. They are not working. The whole idea of tefillah with the Amidah is it's got to be 10 people davening Amidah. It is a tough call, but we'll see. And everyone agrees with him, so we have what to rely on. Okay, especially tomorrow I'm going to 7 o'clock, so I need so we're going to need this. Okay, all right.
Some people daven very quickly.
Yes.
So you might start with 10 at the same time davening Amidah, but very shortly you might have 8 that are davening Amidah. It's still finished in no time.
Right. But the point is they're discharging the obligation now of tefillah together. Okay. Well, anyway, so we've read that, but we're going to skip, but that's what he says. He says this is what you've got to do. So we'll skip over the page. Mr. Brewer brings this, which is kind of what's difficult. In source 17, Mr. Brewer brings this. The ikar tefillah b'tzibur tefillah yudchet, the hainishi palu asara anashim. 10 people should be davening, shem dolim biyachad. 10 adults should be davening together. Not like the masses believe, not like the masses who think it's just to daven Kaddish and Kedusha together. That's a mistake. He got rid of the word gadol. He changed it to just ta'ut, right? You've got to make sure you got to shul on time. So that you can recite Shemona Esrei all at the same time. So the Mishnah Berurah brings the Chai Adam halacha. That means that all 10 have to start the Amidah together. And you see sometimes in shuls that they get to Shacharit to Hilal Lakel Elyon, and then you see the Chazan turn around to see. He wants 10 people. He wants 9 people with him starting the Amidah. However, Mishnah Berurah seems to say differently elsewhere, because elsewhere that he quotes the Magen Avraham says that majority of minyan is considered a minyan, which we actually saw in the previous year against the Shulchan Aruch Harav. Look at source 18, says the Mishnah Berurah, Aval kasheyesh rov minyan hem kumot tzibur gamur. Right? When you have a majority of a minyan, they are like a full tzibur.
Is that 6?
6, yes. 5 plus the chazan plus 5. So surely then the chazan only has to turn around and check that 5 other people are starting their Amidah with him, not 9 other people. No, because that as well. But even to have tefillah b'tzibur, for your minyan to be counted as a communal tefillah, private Amidah, you want to have 6 people starting. Question is 6 or 10. So the Mishnah Berurah quoted the Chai Adam, but here he said 6, right? Rov. So how do we deal with this? So one explanation is that as long as 10 are present, only 6 can be davening. However, Moshe Feinstein gives a difference between 2 different types of tefillah b'tzibur. Sometimes we need tefillah b'tzibur because we want the tzibur to be davening. This is the tzibur davening. Then you need 10. But in order to have just answering Kaddish and Kedusha and Baruch Hu, etc., then it's enough that you have 6 and 4 people have already davened, but they're not davening right now. Right? In that regard, as long as there are 10 people in the room, you can say Kaddish. This is what you said before, Mike. You can say Kaddish and Kedusha and Baruch Hu. But like for this to be the tefillah of the tzibur, then you have to have 10 people davening. So there's 2 dinim, if you like, in tefillah b'tzibur. If you want it to be a tefillah of the tzibur, then you need 10 people doing Amidah at the same time. But to answer Kaddish and Baruch Hu, you're right. You can have 4 who've already davened, and as long as 6 people are davened. Yes.
You can't
And
choose
Chazar
something, you can't
Tashas.
choose something else. You know the numbers, but you couldn't choose something else
It would seem that way. So he says in source 19, he says that Igrot Moshe Feinstein, but Inyan im Sagi Baruba isn't enough when you only have majority. When you only have majority, Shelohit Palalu lehachashed b'malat tefillah b'tzibur b'tziruf elu shekvayit Palalu. Is it enough that you have 6 people who've not yet davened and other 4 you've got who've already davened just to complete the minyan? He says, "Hinei b'davar malat tefillah b'tzibur sheshama she'amarti shu dafka shekol ha'asar palim v'lo sagibrov minyan." That which they say you've got to have 10, it's not enough with 6. Hu ha'emet. That is true, like we saw in the Chai Adam. He says, "V'chein mefresh gam b'Chai Adam." That's what the Chai Adam said. For it to be considered davening with the tzibur, it's got to be 10 people. But if you go over the page, oops, I went too far over the page. Second. He says, "Uma shehuzka," over top page 201. Shehuzka shesagi barov minyan hurak le'inyan lomar davar shepikdusha. So only in terms of answering Kaddish and Kedusha, then it's enough to have 6. And he explains that there's a reason for this. He says, "Vatam pashut." The reason's simple. Delo shayach inyan rubo kukulo al shiurim. The idea that having a majority, 6 out of 10 is like you've got 10, it doesn't exist with measurements. And therefore, he says that when it comes to what is a tzibur, you need to have a whole tzibur. You've got to have 10 people davening now. But if you skip to the next paragraph, the next bit of bold, af. So too, he says, le'inyan amirat davar shebekdusha be'inan kol ha'asara. When it comes to certain matters of holiness, we require all 10. Below sagi baruba. It's not enough with majority. And therefore, you need 10 people to be davening Amida. Now, for it to be considered really davening with the minyan. If you skip down a line, skip down, a paragraph to the next paragraph, Hanidon, but the case here, Hurak, but if you want to know just how many people do you need to recite it, Davar Shepikdusha, like Kaddish or Kedusha or Baruch Hu, Kadesh Yuchlu Lomar, so that people can actually recite it. But if they can't, they say even if you've got 10 people here, in that case, you would say the majority is like the entirety. Since 6 out of 10 of the minyan are obligated in here in Kaddish and Kedusha now, it's like they're all obligated. And therefore, Moshe Feinstein essentially makes this important distinction. Tefillah with a minyan really should have 10 people davening, right? But to answer Kaddish, Kedusha, Baruch Hu, 6 have to be not davened yet, and 4 have to, it doesn't matter if they've not davened. Nonetheless, the preference would be, according to him, that you don't have number 10 fill in for somebody who's already davened for the repetition. However, the Mincha Yitzchak disagrees. If we turn over the page, Rav Yitzchak Yaakov Weiss disagrees, and he thinks that always we've got to follow the majority in this regard. So source 20 says the Mincha Yitzchak, soft davar at the end of the day, gam la'aniyut dati, also in my opinion, nireh, it seems kamoshe katav kvod torato, like the questioner wrote, da'af b'shishta mitpalim levad b'tziruf dalad she'ena mitpalim nechshav l'tfilah b'tzibur. 6 people who are davening now with 4 people who are not davening right now is considered davening with a minyan. So the Mincha Yitzchak disagrees with Rav Moshe Feinstein, but he does say in source 21, it's best to be machmir where you can to have 10 people who've not yet davened. Look at source 21, he says, Omnam, however, in terms of the ideal, katav b'sefer leket hakemach, yesh lahachmir de lo have tefillah b'tzibur, you should be machmir. B'chen nireh lahalacha, yesh lahachmir lechatchila heicha de efsha. You should be machmir where possible. But if it's not possible, then you can rely, as long as you've got 6 people davening, the other 4, even if they've already davened, can make up the minyan. It's considered davening with the minyan. So we have a machloka here between the Mincha Yitzchak and with Moshe Feinstein as to exactly the nature of these minyanim when you have someone else complete. But obviously, typically, if somebody's doing this, it's because we're not going to have a minyan otherwise, right? If you bring someone else from the other minyan, it's because you need them, right? So, and therefore, there's what to rely on to allow it. But proof for the Mincha Yitzchak, but strictly speaking, you only need 6 for it to be counted with a minyan, and the other 4 can have already davened, is actually alluded to in the Rambam, in Hilchot Tefillah. If you look in source 22, the Rambam Hilchot Tefillah seems to imply this way when he describes what a minyan is. In source 22, Hilchot Tefillah Perek Chet, the Rambam says, "The case that he tefillat tzibur." What is davening with a minyan? He says, yeah, echad mitpalel b'kol ram. One person davens aloud, v'akol shomim, and everyone hears and listens, what we call the repetition. Ve'ein osin kei b'pachot me'asara gedolim ibnei chorim. You don't do this with less than 10 adults. Shliach tzibur echad mehem, and the chazan can be one of the 10. But look what he says in the bold. Va'afilu hayu miktzatan shekvar hitpalalu. Even if some of them have already davened, v'yatzu yedei chovatan, and they fulfill their obligation, mashlimin lehem la'asara. They can complete the minyan of 10. But who, on condition, shiur rov ha'asara shelo palu, on condition the majority of the 10, i.e. 6, have not yet davened. So it seems to be pretty obvious according to the Rambam that he's saying like who, like the Minchat Yitzchak. As long as you've got 10, as long as you've got 6 who've not davened, you can have another 4 even if they've already davened. That's what the Rambam seems to imply. Yes, Peter.
It's interesting talking about the concept of Yetzu Yedei Chovatan, because it's a question. Then goes to the question of what is the primary chova? Are you discharging your obligation in tefillah with private Shemona Esrei, or is the primary Shemona Esrei the Chazarah? So if you haven't, if you say that the primary obligation is the Chazarah, which I think the Rambam does say, then
some people say in the Rambam, we'll get to that hopefully, but yeah.
So if you say your primary, if that's the case, then if you've already davened, you haven't discharged your obligation. You only discharge your obligation by hearing the Chazarah. And so then there's no concept of it doesn't matter that whether people have davened or not. If they've already heard Chazarat Hashatz, then they've discharged their obligation. But if they've been in another minyan, but if they haven't been in another minyan and heard the Chazarat Hashatz, they still haven't Yetzu Yedei Chovatan.
Right here, we're going to talk about that. The pashta, the simple understanding is that the real tefillah is 10 people davening Amida at the same time. And the Chazarat Hashatz, the simple understanding of the Gemara is that it was enactment because people were illiterate and they couldn't read for themselves. They needed the Chazan to recite it for them. But lots of very nice drashot sort of come b'diavad, after the fact, to talk about the Chazarat Hashatz as being the main. We'll discuss that. Yes.
I've actually discussed in the Zichron Yaakov this week, and the impression I got is that the Baal Tefillah, for everybody else, it's their main tefillah. For the Baal Tefillah, his silent prayer is his practice, and then.
So this is based on the Khatam Sofer. The Khatam Sofer thought this, and others disagreed. I said in the more Hasidic communities that was sort of adopted but the mainstream, I would say, is not necessarily to say that. We'll get to that hopefully today, if not next week. Okay, but the Rambam here, though, agreed in source 22, Peter, you would also have to agree with this, says that you've got to have a rov of a minyan for repetition. So that seems to say that, Yitzchak against Ramosha Feinstein, that as long as you've got a rov, it's okay. However, Reb Chaim disagrees. Reb Chaim Soloveitchik in source 23, we're going to look at in the stencil, which is his shiurim, which were written by his students. He says, in the stencil in source 23, Reb Chaim argues that no. That in fact, this was only, when did the Rambam say this, that 6 is good enough? Only for the repetition. But when you're silent Amida, you've got to have 10 people davening. That's what the Rambam holds, according to Reb Chaim. And therefore he rejects the Rambam as proof for the Minchat Yitzchak. Well, obviously he lived before the Minchat Yitzchak, but he would reject the Minchat Yitzchak's proof from the Rambam. The Rambam, according to Reb Chaim, was only talking about repetition. Repetition, you just need people answering Amen, right? And therefore 6 is enough, 4 even if they've already davened. But for the Amida, silent Amida, if you just tefillah b'tzibur, then you need all of the tzibur to be davening. You need 10 people davening, otherwise it's not tefillah b'tzibur. It's tefillah b'anashim nochachim. It's tefillah with 10 people present, but it's not tefillah with the community because you haven't got a community of people davening. This is what Reb Chaim explained. So we're just going to skip to the second paragraph in source 23. Just due to time, it says aval mitpalalim. When it comes to davening, tzrichim shekulam yitpalalu. They've all got to be davening. And therefore he says, b'chazarat hashatz, in the repetition, shekulam shom'im v'zeu tfilatam, that in the repetition all the congregation's got to do is listen. Daibarov, it's enough that you have majority, you have 6 people who've not yet davened. But with the silent Amida, Kisharov Minyan Mechuyavim, where the majority are obligated, or Miyuk Vaid Palu, and the minority have already davened, Lo Yochlu Hitzdaref. They cannot join to make a minyan. Sheheni Krashe Palu B'tzibur. Because that it should be considered they daven with the community. Why? Since the minority, you've got let's say a handful of people in the minyan who are not davening right now. How can they join a count of people davening? In terms of obligation, you don't need an obligation. People are obligating the Chazarat Hashatz. But when it comes to the actual act of davening the silent Amida, you need 10 people who are davening. And therefore, Reb Chaim is machmir like Nigrat Moshe, like Moshe Feinstein. Nonetheless, the Yalkut Yosef here, over the page in source 24, he says that there's room. Already we saw the Mincha Yitzchak says you could be lenient when you've she'ef shar, when you've got no other choice, which is often the case when you're trying to schlep another number 10, whatever it is, to use somebody who's not davening right now or already davened. But Yalkut Yosef also adds another case where you could be lenient, not just at a time of great need, but when it's going to cause bittul Torah. He says you shouldn't be machmir if it's going to cause bittul Torah, by having to get a minyan of 10 people together who've none of them have davened yet. If that would cause bittul Torah, then you should go like the lenient. So he brings both opinions. He says in source 24, Hamit palalim b'minyan sheyesh bo shisha or shiva anashim palim biyachad. You've got a minyan with 6 or 7 davening. V'hayetev v'starfin palu kvar, and the other 3 or 4 people in the minyan have already davened. Afal pichen, even so, nechshevet tfilatam tfilah b'tzibur. It's considered davening with a minyan. V'resha'im gam lama chazara'im kedusha b'irkat kohanim, and they can also say the repetition. Sherav minyan kachula, because the majority of the minyan is like all of it. Uki'ilu hayu kol asaram palim yachdav. It's as if all 10 are davening together. However, he brings the other opinion of Moshe Feinstein. The Yeshaman, there are those that say, all 10 have to not have davened yet. Today, such that tefillah is considered like with a minyan. If it's going to cause bittul Torah, loss of Torah learning, then you should not be machmir in this regard. And therefore, he gives another reason to be makel, not just a time of great need, but when you've got no choice, but also bittul Torah as well. Okay, so there's a machloket on this, and she'ef shar, but perhaps bittul Torah, there's room to be lenient in this regard, as is probably the widespread practice in most places. Because in actuality, when are you going to schlep the number 10 when you can't find 10 people who have not yet done? So and you've got the Mincha Yitzchak and Rabbi Yitzchak Yosef to rely on in this regard. Okay. What happens when somebody comes late to shul? And let's talk about mincha to make it a bit more easy. And everyone's already in the Amida, or people are finishing up their Amida. Do you start your Amida now, or do you wait for the chazan to start the repetition, and then you say the repetition along with the chazan? So the Gemara in Brachot says that one may, if you walk in a few minutes late to shul, you can start your Amida now if you think you're going to finish it by the time the chazan's in his repetition. Where? So machloket in the Gemara, whether you have to finish your Amida by the time that the chazan gets up to Kedusha or up to Modim, so that you can either say Kedusha with the congregation or you should bow Modim with the congregation. So we're looking at this machloket here in source 25. Page 205, source 25, the Gemara in Brachot brings this machloket. Amar Rav Huna, says Rav Huna, Hanichnas lebeita knesset u'matzav tzibur mitpalanim. You come into shul, you're late, and you find they're already davening their Amida. If you can start your Amida now and finish it before the chazan gets to Modim, yid palel and daven now. The imlav, but if not, al yid palel, you shouldn't daven right now. Rather, you should not daven. Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi disagrees. He says, what's the cutoff? Im yachol lahatchil v'ligmar ad shelo yagish shliach tzibur likdusha lit palel. The imlav al yid palel. So he says, you walk in a few minutes late. They're all in the Amida. If you can start your Amida and finish your Amida before the chazan gets to Kedusha, then you start. If you can't do that, then you wait for the repetition to start your Amida, because you want to answer the Kedusha with the community. We paskin like Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, and the cutoff point is Kedusha. So if you walk in, let's say, a minute late to Mincha, you're probably going to be okay. But if you walk in 5 minutes late or 4 minutes late, then by the time you blink, you miss it, right? Then you might be better to wait for the repetition and start your Amida with the repetition. That way you can answer Kedusha. That's essentially what we deal with. What we don't discuss here is what about people who come on time to shul but just take a long time over their davening. So the Bir Halacha discusses this, and the Aruch HaShulchan discusses this as well. And they basically say that as long as, like if you think you just because you're a slow davener, you're never going to finish, you shouldn't rush. Maybe the Bir Halacha is not so sure. The Aruch HaShulchan said you shouldn't rush to finish if you're typically davening more slowly. Okay. So what do you do in this regard? So the Rambam says you should wait and start your Amida. If you're late, you should start your Amida when the Chassan starts repetition and say it word by word together with him. We look at the Rambam Hilchot Tefillah here in source 26. Hanichnas lebeit hakneset u'matzah sibo shemit palim balachash. You walk into a shul and you find the community davening. Im yachol hatchil v'ligmor ad shelo yagia shliach tzibur lekedusha. If you start and finish before the Chazan reaches the kedusha, yitpalel. Then you should daven your Amida now when you walk in. V'im love. But if not, yamtin ad sheyatchil shliach tzibur lehitpalel b'koram. Wait until the Chazan starts the repetition. V'yitpalel imo belachash mila b'mila. And start, as the Chazan starts Hashem Sefetay Tiftach, you also start with him and whisper it along with him word for word, ad sheyagir shliach tzibur lekedusha, until he gets to the kedusha. V'oneh kedusha imat tzibur. And you should answer the kedusha with the community. And you can actually join in because you're actually in the right place, right? If you're davening with the Chazan, usually you're not allowed to answer the Kedusha unless you're at the end of davening, right? But you can, if you're actually up to the bracha at the end of Machai HaMeitim, then you can join the Kedusha because you're in the right place. Palel shar tefillah. Then once you've all finished the Kedusha, then you daven the rest of the tefillah to yourself. And this is what the many of the Rishonim say. The Tosfot say this as well as the Rambam and the Rosh as well. And the Shulchan Aruch writes this way. However, the Ramah doesn't like it. Moshe Isserles says it's best that you should wait. Don't start when he starts Hashem Sefetay Tiftach. Rather, says the Ramah, which we'll see in Sinai source 27. What should you do? You should wait till he says Akel HaKadosh, answer Amen, and then when he goes to Atachonen, then you start your Amida. So we look in source 27. This is a machlok between the Shulchan Aruch and the Ramah. In source 27 says the Shulchan Aruch, Im matchil hitpalel im shliach tzibur. If you start to daven with the Chazan because you're late. When you reach Nat Tishach, right? We would say the Kadesh, but obviously the Shulchan Aruch said Nat Tishach because he was Sfarad, right? Literally from Spain. Yomar imo mila b'mila. You say word by word. Kol hakedusha k'moshu omer. You say it word by word with him. V'chen yomar imo mila b'mila birkat hakel hakadosh. Also, you should say with him the bracha of hakel hakadosh birkat shemer tefillah and the bracha of shema kolein. In other words, you should really get to these places at the same time as the repetition. Also, the ideal is that when the Chazan gets to Modim and you're in your silent Amida, you also get to Modim at the same time. Or to Atov Shimcha, because you should bow at Modim at the same time the community's bow. So says the Shulchan Aruch based on the Rambam, you start your repetition, you start as the Chazan starts repetition. The Ramah disagrees there at the end of source 27. Hagam. But ideally, lo yatchil ad la'achar she'amar kedusha v'hakel hakadosh. Wait till after hakel hakadosh. Ela she'im tzarach la'atchil mekoach she'hasha overet. But only if you have to start now because you're running out of time. Then you can do that. So, but the Ramah says you should wait till Hakel HaKadosh, and then when he goes on to Atachonen, that's when you start your Amida. So, Machloket would seem here between Ashkenazim and Sfaradim, right? As to when you start. However, it's not so clear because there are those that say that even Ashkenazim should, in fact, start straight away at the beginning. Mishnah Berurah discusses it elsewhere. We're going to skip source 28 just due to time, but he discusses as well that the ideal is that you do practically say word for word. The Alka Yosef here in source 29 says like the Machaber, like the Shulchan Aruch, that you should start your Amida with the Chazan if you're late. and you're not going to finish your Amida before you get to Kedusha. Don't wait till after Kedusha, like the Ramah says, but rather you should start straight away. And if we look here, this is what he says in source 29, says the Yalkut Yosef. Let's skip to the bold at the end of source 29. He says, V'zeh yoter nachon, to do this, to start straight away, like the Shulchan Aruch said, with the Chazan. Zeh yoter nachon, that's more correct. Mimash yesh nagim, it is more correct than those who have the practice, lahamtin, to wait. It's better than to wait till after Kedusha, which is what the Ramah said to Ashkenazim to do. Today, not amen, in order to be able to answer amen. But and only after Kedusha then will they start the Amida. The minhag is like the first approach. And I have to say, even though the Ramah says what he says, amongst Ashkenazim as well, there's a strong minhag to start, if people want, with the Chazan. Somebody who's late to shul and they're not going to finish their Amida before Kedusha, could start with the Chazan. And doesn't have to wait till afterwards, like the Ramah ruled him. And therefore, even though it does seem like a machloket Ashkenazim and Sfardim, nonetheless, there are many Ashkenazim who would also start from the beginning with the Chazan if they're late to shul. Okay. Beseder Gamur. So even though Ashkenazim follow the Ramah in this, there are those who do allow for Ashkenazim to also start straight away with the Chazan. Now, the question is, there's this Khatam Sofer, which I think Peter alluded to before, or I think you also alluded to as well, Jeff. This idea that maybe the repetition is more important than the actual Amida itself. The Khatam Sofer discusses this. And he says this is exactly why silent Amida, the Chazan, you should, if you're late to shul and you're not going to be able to rush your Amida in time, he says that it's best that you start with the Chazan. This is based on what you guys said before, which is what? But really, the repetition is the main Amida. If it's the main Amida, then you want him to daven it with the Chazan. And therefore, the Khatam Sofer, in quite radical fashion, says that basically, silent Amida is just preparation for the repetition, which is kind of counterintuitive. And Ramosha finds he's going to go to town. We'll get there. But let's have a look at the Khatam Sofer's radical claim in source 30 here, which you read. Which newsletter did you read this in? Zichron Yaakov. Okay. So it's the Khatam Sofer who says this. Let's look in source 30. Umashi Sha'al, that was the question that asked. Whether the Kedusha you can recite with the Chazan when you're davening with him. Zehu ikal tefillah b'tzibur. This is the primary idea of davening with the community. Why? That which we all daven the silent Amida before the repetition. What does he say? Mikre tefillah yachid. That's the tefillah of the individual, the loner. Only when one person says it on behalf of everyone, that is called tefillah with the community. Tefillah b'tzibur. It's quite a radical claim. He goes on and he says, so why do we even have a silent Amida then? It's only because it's impossible for everyone to listen for 5 minutes to the Chazan with proper intent. Therefore, Chazal instituted everyone should daven on their own. However, it would be fitting really, what's the ideal? We should really, in theory, be saying the Amida word for word with the Chazan instead of doing our own private Amida first. That would be being motzi the community of their obligation. Like we learned in Sukkah, like that was a practice that many places had for Hallel. They would daven and respond after him. So why? I'll get to you in a second, Peter. So what's the reason we instituted the silent Amida? So that the Shliach Tzibur would have preparation for his davening. So therefore they instituted the silent Amida as preparation for the repetition. That's what he claims. And therefore he says, of course you should start if you're late for shul and you're not going to finish your silent Amida in time. You should start at the beginning with the Chazan, like the Shulchan Aruch said, because that's really the main tefillah. Yes, Peter.
Sorry, I was only going to comment that what the Khatam Sofer says in the beginning about about the essence being, it's the same really with Birkat Hamazon, that we, when we're doing Mezumano, we're doing with the Minyan, that the custom now is that everyone says Birkat Hamazon by themselves. But I think really the practice should be is that the person who is the Mezuman should say the whole of Birkat Hamazon out loud, and we should all pay attention and say Amen. But it's just in recognition that, in fact, no one can actually pay attention and say Amen, and that's why we all say it for ourselves. But really, it's not what we should be doing.
Correct. All 4 brachot should be recited by the Mezamen aloud, and you're supposed to listen word by word and answer Amen to everyone. That would be the ideal. And that's what the practice was. The Bach writes that we don't do this anymore. It's too difficult, so you will say them along quietly. But yeah, that's you're right. That it's a similar idea which the Khatam Sofer is raising here. But Rav Moshe Feinstein says this is just. He kind of says it's absurd. I mean, I think the words he uses it's a divrei ta'ut. These are words of error. Misunderstanding. He strongly disagrees with this Khatam Sofer and says, of course, that the silent Amida is tefillah b'tzibur. To call what the Khatam Sofer call it tefillah yachid. It's like davening on your own. When Moshe Feinstein says chas v'shalom, he says it's incredibly astonishing. Let's look at Rav Moshe Feinstein, the Igrat Moshe here in source 31. He says, "V'yotel tamor." It's even more astounding. Masha b'sefer lekutei shut me'achatam sofer shenidpas mechadash b'siman gimel itagam ken. But how can it be that the Chazal Sofer writes the Masha yachid mitpalel imat shliach tzibur zeu ikar tefillah b'tzibur? The individual davening along with the repetition, that is the main tefillah. How can that be? He says in the bold. Shaharei, because surely kol dvarim elu hu lichora divrei ta'ut. There seems to be some sort of error, mistake. We said historically, what was the real reason they daven Chazar Tashatz? Fulfill the obligation of people who don't know how to daven themselves. Shekulan b'kiyim, and when everyone there knows how to daven. In fact, the Rishonim would ask, do we really need to recite the repetition in a minyan where everyone can read Hebrew and everyone knows how to daven? In other words, clearly you see that historically, the Amida repetition is the secondary, not the primary. So he totally disagrees with the Khatam Sofer and says history is not with him. But the Mekubalim do say this as well. It's not just the Khatam Sofer. The Mekubalim also discuss this idea that the repetition, in some sense, the Chida and others, the repetition in some sense is the primary idea. Unless Rav Moshe Feinstein strongly disagrees. He says there after the bold, "V'imrak tfilat hashatz l'hotzi hayat tfilat tzibur." If only the repetition was considered tefillah with a minyan, harei haya lehem letakem mishvil ze atzmo le'olam. Then they should have instituted this permanently. Because then it would apply ever. Why did Chazal on the Gemara say the idea of the repetition is to help people who don't know how to read? They have a much better reason. It's the main tefillah. And these are words which you can't argue with. He really disagrees with the Khatam Sofer's analysis. He goes on further. He says, "V'gam," and also, how can you call the Chazan's repetition the main tefillah? Or tefillat halachash and the silent Amida, even though the big community daven it in one go, who rak tefillat yachid? How can the Khatam Sofer call it a tefillah of the individual when you're all davening it together? Because this would mean, as a result, that when the kahal, when they don't fulfill the obligation with the shliach tzibur, and they haven't fulfilled the obligation with tefillah just by their silent amida. Because when they hear the repetition, they've already davened once, and therefore, obviously, the second time around, it's not real tefillah. But nimtzan, as a result, it seems she'ikaro mitzvah tefillah b'tzibur. So they've uprooted the concept of mitzvah tefillah b'tzibur. Shalom mistaber klal. It's not logical at all. That they should uproot the tefillah. It doesn't make any sense. He basically rejects the Khatam Sofer. The Shevet Halevi, Rav Wazna, however, disagrees and tries to answer for the Khatam Sofer. And the Shevet Halevi over the page, source 32, argues essentially there are two types of tefillah b'tzibur. There's tefillah b'tzibur, which is a tefillah on behalf of the whole congregation. And then there's tefillah b'tzibur, which is where everyone is davening for themselves. He says when the Khatam Sofer says that the primary tefillah is the repetition, that's referring to the idea of a korban being offered on behalf of the whole congregation. That is what's more important in the repetition. And it might be what you read also in the newsletter. That's what the Khatam Sofer meant. But of course, when all the individuals, you have a million of people all davening Amidah together, that's also tefillah b'tzibur. That's individuals davening as a tzibur. And therefore both are true. So that's how he tries to explain what the Khatam Sofer referred to. Not to say chas v'shalom that the primary thing is repetition, or that davening individually beforehand is not important. But rather they have different goals. Davening beforehand is tefillah b'tzibur, davening with a congregation. You have 10 people all davening Amidah. And tefillah of the repetition is another type of tefillah b'tzibur. It's tefillah through the congregation when you have one person offering up a communal prayer. So this is what he discusses. So he says, I saw, so let's read 32. He says, I saw Rav Moshe Feinstein, he says that the Chassam Sofer is wrong. Sheva Levi disagrees. Excusing his kavod, I disagree with the Rav Moshe Feinstein. The idea of all individuals all davening together in service of God for davening, even though each person is davening on their own, nikra avoda b'tzibur. This is still called communal tefillah. In our case, this is tefillah b'tzibur. Let's skip down a paragraph to the bold. Hare, because behold, the ikar shnei gidrei avodat tzibur. There are two types of communal avoda. Hainu, that is, aleph. One of them is korban avur kol hatzibur. There's davening for the entire community. And bet, the second one is mashe mikaptzin la'asot avotam b'tzibur. Or kamal chen le'inyan tefillah. It's the same thing with tefillah. So we're not going to read the rest of it inside, just due to time. But essentially, what's he arguing? He's arguing that what? If you've got two dinim. So if you come on time, you're davening, but the tzibur is davening, all of you. And then you've got the communal offering, which comes after the repetition. If you go over to the next page, in the paragraph there, which is bold on the next page, Vahashta, he says, and now, im ira, if it happens to be she'echad icher, one person comes late, so they have to daven with the chazan during the repetition. What all the Khatam Sofer says is that that's also considered davening with the minyan, the hainu, which is daga rishona shel tefillah tzibur, the other type of tefillah tzibur. So if you're late to shul, you don't have tefillah tzibur in the regard of the tzibur all davening together. But by davening with the repetition, you're still davening with the tzibur because that is the tzibur's tefillah. Repetition is the tefillah of the tzibur. And that's what he argues. I'll allow myself just to add in, Soloveitchik argued similarly, that Chazarat HaShatz is what he called not just tefillah b'tzibur, but it's tefillat hatzibur. It is the tefillah of the community. The chazan is being motzi a communal tefillah right now. In addition to the tefillah b'tzibur, which is everyone davening together beforehand, then you go into what Rav Soloveitchik called tefillat hatzibur. And that's why the Frigal Rav Soloveitchik wouldn't say Baruch Hu Baruch Shemo. He would only answer Amen. Sort of Lichtenstein itself do the same. His son Roger Lichtenstein Shlita also doesn't say Baruch Hu Baruch Shemo. He says Amen. And they stand there with their feet together because it's tefillat hatzibur. The repetition is tefillah of the community. That's what they do. And the Alkut Yotzef in source 33 rules the same way here. And he says here in source 33, the Alkut Yotzef, the same is true that if somebody's late to shul and you daven with the repetition with the chazan, it's still considered tefillah b'tzibur because it's the communal time for tefillah as well. So in source 33, he says, Yachid hamikpalel tefillat shmona esrei balachash im chazarata shel tzibur, individual who's late for shul and davens their private amidah with the chazan, nechshevet tefillat tefillat b'tzibur. It's still considered like davening with a minyan. She'ikar tefillah b'tzibur hi al tefillat shmona esrei. Since the main part of tefillah is through the shmona esrei, and you're doing it with the chazan who's doing it on behalf of the community. Okay, so over the page, tefillah kilchata, some important practical halachot. Somebody who comes to shul late and they have to daven together with the chazan, we've got to go through the following halachot. If you start your amidah with the chazan, the following important halachot pertain to it, and he gives us a nice summary here in source 34. He says, a few important points to note. 4 points he brings. But tefillah im hashatz, somebody who's davening together with the chazan because they came late, should be careful of the following points. Aleph, the first point. So firstly, the chazan should really always say the entirety of kedusha aloud. Because somebody who's late has to say the kedusha along with him. Bet. Second point. When responding to kedusha, so when you get up on your feet to do kadosh, 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 and baruch and yimloch, then also the person who's who's davening along with the chazan because they're late should also do it with them. And also after the siyam kedusha, once you finish the phrase yimloch, yomar ptichat bracha shlishit v'nusach she'omer shliach tzibur. You don't say ata kadosh, you say ledor v'adar nagid godlecha, the same way that the chazan does, because it's the shliach tzibur tefillin. So if you're late for shul, you say ledor v'adar with the chazan. You don't say ata kadosh. Gimel, the third point to make. Yesh li stapek. It's not so clear. Im hamik palel im ashliach tzibur yomar itogam barchenu babracham sheleshet batorah. Let's say you're doing this in right. It's funny, right? Let's say you're doing this in shacharit. Should he say birkat kohanim with the chazan? It's not so clear. Hashayechet birkat kohanim, which is what we say before simcha shalom. Should he stay along with the chazan in his private mida barchenu babracha? Even if he's davening word for word, it's not so clear. And there are those who write that he's allowed to say. I think the contemporary practice is not too. Usually by this point, you've gone further ahead anyway, right? So
that we think from Israel, because Israel, you are going to have the Kohanim.
I would argue in Israel you wouldn't say it at all, right? Daled, the fourth important point. Daled, Batanit Sivor on a fast day. There's another practical difference. What does the chazan do at both Shachrit and Mincha on a fast day? He adds an extra bracha, Aneinu. So Batanit Sivor Afilu b'Mincha Omar Aneinu b'Shamet Tefillah Kol Yachid. He should not say a separate bracha. He should add Aneinu in the private Amida. So this is sort of a synopsis of the practical halachot of what you do. You say a long word for word. You say Lador Vadar. There's a preference we saw really to get to Shema Koleinu with the chazan and to bow modim with the chazan, but as well if one's able to. So this is sort of what one would do if one is davening. I think we'll stop here just for Mariv, and we'll talk about the Heche Kedusha next week on page 214, Bezrat Hashem, which is the shortened repetition. We say that, so we shall stop there. Everyone should have an Erev Tov, and the Zoom room ratio is not looking great tonight. If I can encourage some more people to come back in person, always would be lovely. And the whiskey is particularly good this evening, so you should quite. That you don't get on Zoom. All right, Erev Tov, everyone. Have a good evening. Shakar.